Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Pérez Art Museum Miami. My name is Marie Vickles, and I'm the Director of Education. I sincerely hope that all of you joining us in this digital space are doing well, taking care of yourselves, your loved ones, and that tonight's program brings some joy and inspiration into your life. Our mission at PAMM is to encourage everyone to see art as an incentive for genuine human interaction, communication, and exchange. And we think that this evening's program will do just that. Tonight, the Pérez Art Museum Miami, PAMM, and Women's Photographers International Archive, WOPHA, present At Home with WOPHA, a virtual interview of the organization's director and art historian, Aldeide Delgado, with curator of programming, Amy Rosenblum-Martín. A few acknowledgements before I introduce our speakers. I would like to thank the incredible team that have worked so very hard to bring tonight's program together. Big thanks to Anita Bram, Associate Director of Adult Programs and Audience Engagement, and our world-class AV team, Denise Faxis and Andrew Bird. We could not do this without you. I would also like to thank Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer and local celebrity Carl Just for allowing me to host tonight's program from IPC Art Space right here in Little Haiti, Miami. Thank you. Now, let's get this program started with introductions of our speakers. Aldeide Delgado is the founder and director of Women's Photographers International Archive, WOPHA. She has a background in advising and presenting at art history forums based on photography, including lectures at the Tate Modern, PAMM, California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, and the New School. Delgado is a recent recipient of the 2019 Night Arts Challenge Award, the 2018 School of Art Criticism Fellowship, and a 2017 Research and Production of Critic Essay Fellowship. Her areas of scholarly interest include a feminist and decolonial rereading of the history of photography and abstraction from the Latin American, the Caribbean, and Latinx contexts. She is an active member of PAMM's International Women's Committee, IKT, International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art, US Latinx Art Forum, and Art Table. Amy Rosenblum-Martín is a New York-based independent curator of contemporary art for museums. This bilingual, English and Spanish, curator has long been a leader in the field of Latinx art, committed to equity and community engagement from the get-go. Formerly a staff curator at the Miami Art Museum, now known as PAMM, and the Bronx Museum, she has worked more recently for MoMA, MoMA PS1, the Mets, the Guggenheim, MCA Chicago, the Hirshhorn, MACBA, Barcelona, Reina Sofia, Madrid, London's National Portrait Gallery, Kunsthaus Bregenz, Austria, as well as MIT, NYU, the New School, Peking University, and Colección Patricia Phelps de Cisneros. She curated US Museum solo debuts by Consuelo Castañeda, Dara Friedman, Adler Guerrier, Quisqueya Enriquez, Marissa Moran-John, Glexis Novoa, and Javier Teles. During the course of this evening's conversation, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will try to answer as many as possible. And remember, if you value this and other programs presented by the museum, please consider supporting us by going to pam.org/donate. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Aldeide Delgado and Curator of Programming, Amy Rosenblum-Martín.
Thank you so much, Marie and Pam and all of you who've made this program possible. Thank you so much for having WOPHA here tonight, represented by its incredible founding director, Aldeide, and myself. So Aldeide, we met not too long ago, I think thanks to my Mendieta project at the Sugar Hill Children's Museum. And we hit the ground running, wanting to collaborate, which I'm very grateful for. So you founded WOPHA, and I wonder if you'll tell us about when you did that and why and where. Tell us a little bit about the history of WOPHA, please.
Well, thank you so much that all of you that are here today in this scenario. Thank you, Mari, and all the PAMM team. When we were speaking about some of the topics that we will have in this conversation, I decided to prepare a presentation because I think that will be so helpful for the people that are watching today to see some of the work of WOPHA. So I will share my screen. Let me see one moment. And yes, are you seeing that? Perfect. So when you ask me where I created Women Photographers International Archive, I created the organization in 2018 after 2 years living in Miami and 5 years working with the project Catalog Cuban Women Photographers. And I said that because, as we will discuss later in our conversation, all my projects result of my personal experience. So for me, creating WOPHA was a direct result of me identifying with the multicultural character of the city of Miami. As I said, where the organization was created in 2018 to research, promote, support, and educate on the role of women. And I like to say those identified as women in photography. As part of we have a strong focus on the historical research, producing rigorous academic content related, we're specifically focused on the area of the Caribbean and Latin American, including Central and South American, and artists living and working in the United States. I also consider or keep a focus on the Latinx communities as part of the mission of WOPHA. At the core of the organization also is the collaboration with different institutions to offer different, to have the opportunity to create exhibitions in a physical or online format, organize scholarly symposiums and lectures, offer opportunities of artist residency for the artists, artist residencies, photography-based workshops, as I am showing here in the presentation. We make all of these activities. And I am very proud, for example, of how recently I was able to participate in this recent book published by the editorial Textual, Our History of Women Photographers. And that evidence how our organization works, how I participate or contribute for different initiatives. And in this case, as you see, this big or great book manifesto include 300 women photographers, and I am so proud to include the contributions of Cuban women photographers as part of this book. Also, when we organized these lectures, this was a panel discussion that I organized last year in the Bailey Contemporary Arts in Pompano Beach. It was so important for me because, as you see here, artist Silvia Lizama, Miami-based artist Silvia Lizama and Nereida Garcia Ferraz participated in this discussion. And also, let's see, where this is a recent partnership that we established with Fine Arts when we are offering 2-month space, a studio space to artist Amanda Bradley here in the city. So I think that is a general scope of how the organization works.
Okay, perfect. That's a great intro. Thank you, Aldeide. So you did mention that women for you means anyone who identifies as a woman. Would you like to add anything to that in terms of how you think about the word woman?
Well, as I said, for me, when I use the term women in my projects, I am very aware of the different definitions that this term has had during the evolution of the feminist theorists. And specifically, I consider women as a political subject that recognize that there are different ways to be a woman according to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, creed, religion, etc. So I am very, when I use the terms, it's very inclusive of all cis and trans women. And basically it includes any person that recognized as such. In another hand, I also, I am aware of something that the philosopher Paul Preciado has referenced in terms of how women has worked as an opaque entity. And what does mean is that in the sense that women for so long has worked as a category that has been essentialized and has hidden the privilege of certain kind of women, and I will say white, middle class, heterosexual women, about other marginalized subjectivities or marginalized women or eccentric subjectivities. So I am very aware of that malleability that the term can have. And finally, I also coincide or relate with the idea developed by theorist Bell Hook in the way that she referenced women as a subject position. That's so interesting for me. And I remember when I was reading the book, Women Photographers and Feminist Aesthetics, how Claire Raymond, the author of the book, she mentioned that all those persons that in a certain way are shaped by forms of sexual oppression can be socially configured as women. So that's my understanding of the term.
And I know we could go even farther than that, but we'll save that for another conversation because we have a lot to cover in this short time. So thank you for explaining that, Aldeide. So you started getting interested in women's studies before you started your first organization, which is the Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers in 2013. I'm curious about how your two organizations relate to each other. So that's the Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers and WOPHA. And why were you inspired to create your first organization, the Catalog?
Well, the first things to know is that Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers is not another organization. It's a project, a research project that started in 2013 as in a moment when I was studying art history at the University of Havana. What is important here is that the catalog is the base of WOPHA. It's my first approach to photography, as you said, to women's studies is my first approach to photography, and it constitutes the base of the organization. My need of creating Women Photographers International Archive emerged as a result of trying to find another structure that allows me to expand the scope of the project. Living in Miami, I didn't want to continue with a project only focused on Cuban photographers, but also to expand the approach to the Caribbean and Latin American and well, South Florida as well, because I noticed that that condition of underrepresentation that I have noted in the Cuban context also were present here. And I will, if I go back to to that part of the question that you asked me, what inspired me to create the Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers, I specifically remember when I was studying in the university, how, for example, many theses were dedicated to the study of photography. And as you see here, only 1.8% of that thesis were dedicated to photography. So that sparks my attention in the first instance to where the photography were. And then I remember that when I started looking on the archives, the libraries in Cuba, I founded this fundational essay, Apuntes para una historia de la fotografía en Cuba, where, if you see, only has a compilation of 318 photographs, and only 8 photographs were taken by women photographers.
Amazing. Yeah.
Representing only were 3% of the photograph in the book, and where only 2 women photographers were included. And I was curious by this other statistic data in terms of 87 photographs were identified or accredited as anonymous. And that, you know, make me think in terms of who are the women, because the beginning of the project Catalog Cuban Women Photographers also was that I was in the university studying, and when I expressed my interest in Cuban women photographers, people used to tell me, well, there are no women here, or they are not good. So that you know, this is what makes me really to go and propose this idea of creating a catalog of Cuban women photographers. Also, I think here, I bring this specific information because, as you see, this text is from 1979, and the other one, this specifically other text, Cuba, 100 Years of Photography, was from 1998. And what this is evidencing is the in the first hand, the outdated state of studies about photography in the island. And I am speaking here specifically about the 2012 context. And in the other hand is the lack of representation that women photographers had.
So it's a lack of representation of photography within the art discourse in Cuba, and also within that, a lack of representation of women.
Exactly. And if you go here, this is this idea of proposing a catalog of Cuban women photographers became a radical act in a context where the history of photography has been institutionalized, centering specifically in male photojournalists whose work in association with the political agenda of the government have reinforced the populist values of the post-1959 Cuban context, and have privileged this idea of the heroic male-centered iconography. So what I try
as propaganda.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. So for me, it was so important creating this compilation, this catalog, provoking this rereading of the history of Cuban photography spanning the 19th century through the present. I remember that at the beginning, the project had a specific time frame and a specific roster of artists, but with every time that I met with a new photographer, the need of creating an ongoing project was confirmed to me. So that's how I came with this project that has women as its center and works as, at this moment, as an online database when you can go and you find the where a registration of different artists, and with where the biography, artist statement, and a selection of 15 works.
You know what? I was just remembering that I think that's actually how I originally found out about your work, because I was doing research online to find more women of color, especially from the Caribbean and Latin America. And I just like bumped into your catalog of Cuban women photographers, and it was a very useful resource for me, and I researched to see who created it, and then that's how I found you originally. I just realized that it's a very useful resource.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a resource that is dedicated specifically to support researchers, art historians, curators, to find these artists and where present their work. I like to think that by creating the catalog, I wasn't only breaking the barriers that women photographers experience, but also encouraging others to collect, research, and present their work with the audience.
Excellent. Is there one achievement that you're proudest of with that project, with the catalog of Cuban women photographers?
Yes, and I include image. I think that about everything here. And the other, yeah, when I think about the achievement of the project, one of the of the elements of which I feel more proud about was finding the female division of the Cuban Photography Club. The Cuban Photography Club was the most important, the most significant institution dedicated to photography history in the Republican period. That frames from 1902 to 1959. The promotion of photography as an art form, and where I remember reading a lot of books, well, not a lot of really, only 2 books I found at that time dedicated to studying the experience of the Cuban Photography Club, and in none of them was the presence of women photographers recognized. This image that I'm showing here is so significant because when I was in that moment, I was looking in the catalogs and looking on the page by page, trying to find evidence of the existence of women in this institution. I found this photograph by Felita Parera, and I still remember my excitement when I found it. And even in this year, 1945, the number of women photographers in the institution were 12, which provoked the creation of Aldeide's room in this, in this space. So I have presented this research in several spaces, including at the New School in 2018 as part of the symposium Cuban Photography, La Isla en su imagen durante 2 siglos. And then last year, I presented also in the Coral Museum, and finally at the Tate Modern. And that's at the core of the organization, how we are able to expand and bring these opportunities to the artists in the way that I present their work in different scenarios.
So you're saying that all of these talks that you've been given are part of your work as a representative of WOPHA. So this historicizing, this academic work that you're doing is WOPHA work.
Yes, well, yeah. I think so. I still don't know how to, I still don't separate one thing for the other. I remember that another of my passion that is abstraction. And well, I do a lot other research projects as part of my work as a curator. And well, I am, making a balance between WOPHA, but I am 100% dedicated to the organization all the time.
That is clear to me as part of the organization. So what kind of photography does WOPHA focus on?
Let me see how, I don't have a specific approach, a specific limitation established a priori in terms of which kind of photography include or no when I decide to start a new project. For me, is so, you know, it depends really on the context in which I am doing the research. For me, it's very clear that women have been working with photography for so long. In some cases, they have been, you know, more focused in the specific, I don't want to say limitations, but in the specificity of the medium, thinking on photography in a modernist way. And in other cases, they had, they problematized the medium, or they, you know, dematerialized the medium, hybridized the medium. So I include all of that experience of photography or practice of photography in my projects, because what is so important here is that our first approach is to finding these voices, is to find these women, and that's the importance of the historical part of our practice. And thinking about that, I remember now an argument that Abigail Solomon developed in her book, Photography at the Dock, and she mentioned that photography is not the history of remarkable men, nor the history of remarkable pictures, but the history of photographic uses. And I said that because when I approach to photography, I don't approach in the same way to an artist of the early 20s whose work could mainly have circulated through magazines that are artists, for example, that now we may consume her practice in the arts circuit, thinking on galleries and museums. So I am very careful for making that distinctions when I am going to study the work of a specific artist. And the other, I think that as part of the organization, the other part that is, where the other element that is important is how I understand photography as an apparatus of truth. And in that sense, how it has the role that photography have had in the legitimation of the discourses of colonialism, and, you know, where racism, patriarchy, in the way that we understand the world today. So doing our work focused on women photographers, for me, is a way to create content narratives to that history of photography and bring justice, thinking on the power of representation that photography have.
Like visualizing equity and justice.
Exactly. So,
and no, I will just mention that for the people out there, that Aldeide and I have had extensive conversations about what is photography, and they don't really fit into the this short conversation, but we have, as a curator of programming, we have programs coming up where we will explore the far-reaching limits of what photography can be, which is super interesting to me anyway. Okay, so there's this artwork that we have discussed that I have in mind. I'm wondering if you could pull it up and talk about it. It's the art, I'm thinking of this photograph taken by Nereida Garcia Ferraz. And it has Eugenia Vargas and Laura Gonzalez in it. And also it brings up for me the fact that you are like a leading authority or an upcoming leading authority in explaining to people this term Latinx. And how do the image and that word go together for you? And also, how does that combine with your being in Miami? You also, I'm sorry, this is kind of a extended question, but it also at WOPHA, okay, thank you. Women Photographers International Archive. What about the international? Living in Miami, does international have a different meaning in that context than it does, say, here in New York City? I wonder. What do you think?
Yes, I will take advantage one moment of being and doing this presentation in this context. And I will show some image of the artists that include the catalog. And I think that will illustrate you also when argumenting this question that you had in terms of what kind of photographers we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, to go to that photograph that you are mentioning. And yeah,
it's great to see these images.
Yes, and well, I am so happy also to have, well, include this photograph by Maria Martinez Cañas that well, recently received an award from the ULAIS, and I was so happy for that. And well, we can later come back to this part of the, well, if you want
that's
to,
the
if you want
that
to,
I was
yeah, if you want
of.
to
Sorry,
explore
I
more.
jumped to that. Yeah.
Well, specifically, I like this photograph, or this series of photographs by Nereida Garcia Ferraz that I included in the last exhibition, Building a Feminist Archive, Cuban Women Photographers in the US, that I curated last year. It's a photograph series in collaboration with artists Eugenia Vargas from Chile and Laura Gonzalez from Mexico, a project made in 1989. And what is important for me about this series is the context in which they are doing the work. I remember how Nereida mentioned how at this moment in the context of Chicago, they were exploring this idea of what does it mean to be a Latina in the US. And also this project has, where they were doing this performance, photographic performance in the sand, and, you know, doing this kind of enjoyment of themselves and exploring the environment and their bodies, but also it brings me this spirit of collaboration that is so important in the philosophy of WOPHA. Mm-hmm. And if I remember, the question is how I define or how I understand international in the context of the organization. Mm-hmm. And for that, yeah, for me, I remember an essay by Doreen Massey, a geographer, feminist geographer and social scientist, Doreen Massey. The text is called A Global Sense of Place, a text published in 1991, I think. And in this essay, she explored or defined this idea of place as an evocative mix of people. A place, she said, well, this evocative mix of people of multiple ethnicities living and working side by side. And she continues saying that a place is defined for the multiple histories and social interactions that happen within this space. So thinking on that definition, and also in the definition of border that Gloria Anzaldúa developed in Feminist Chicana Theories, Gloria Anzaldúa developed in her essay Borderlands. And she specifically referenced the context of the border between Mexico and the US, but I tried to extrapolate that context of the border and this idea of place to the city of Miami. And I imagine the city as this border place between the Americas. So I think that's the way in which I approach to international, as this border space where people from multiple ethnicities, people from multiple cultures collides, cross-pollinate, language multiplicate, and how from, you know, embracing that character, I provoke this exercise of rereading the history, or the colonial rereading of photography history. And I don't know if in the, yes, I brought this image that is from the series that we started when we're in March. I think that was in March or March, April, right after the pandemic started, and we were forced to shift our programming to the virtual sphere, and
right.
how we
So you're
started
going
this
from
WOPHA
place,
series.
right? You're going from like place, like Miami is a physical place, to where does WOPHA exist, which is right now it exists online,
Exactly,
mostly, right?
online.
Yeah.
And when in this, and it's just to show how we find these artists that in some cases are based in Miami, but they come from everywhere. And of course, considering artists from the Caribbean, Afro-Latinx artists, as the case of Nadia
I have
Hoodis.
a question. I have a question for you. So are you saying that WOPHA mostly focuses on artists in Miami? Because my understanding was actually that it was like artists from really all over the world.
Yeah, it's from artists of all over the world. Of course, I am in Miami. I
love Miami.
I am following the women photographers. Yes, I follow the women photographers in the city. I am studying them. I am also doing historical work here, historical research work here. But when my origins, I study the Caribbean as well. I am very proud. Next year, I will be doing a research about women photographers from Dominican Republic, in collaboration with Centro Nuevo León. So, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. Do you have any other question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to go over these WOPHAgram pictures. No? Oh, okay. Okay, so that leads me to the question of, like, what is WOPHA for the public? You know, you use the word archive, which, I mean, well, archive is sort of a loaded term that we can unpack in another context, but like, what, is it an archive that the public has access to? Like, how are you hoping that the archive helps whom? Who's the target audience? Who's this archive for?
Yeah, when as the audience of WOPHA or the audience of archive are any person that are interested and wants to know more about photography, that wants to know more about women photographers, and other non-binary subjects or voices in photography. And that's in the first instance, but we also have a very very strong focus on the scholars in universities, curators, and how we try to impact in the kind of work that these persons do within their institutional spaces. I think that, you know, we have spoke about it, but I like to think on my work and the work of WOPHA as a kind of, you know, contamination with a contamination strategy, in the way that we are always thinking in this idea of redefining institutions, challenging institutions, challenging museums, challenging universities. And in that sense, collaboration is so important in the way that we can offer the opportunity to the person that are in these spaces to create other programs and more opportunities for the artist. And
Go ahead, sorry.
And yes, also when accessibility is so important for us, the catalogs are online. Right now, we have the catalog of Cuban women photographers, when you can go and access to information. And the idea is to expand all of these electronic resources in a big database that have all these women photographers from all over the world.
The word that really sticks out for me from what you've been talking about just now is collaboration, because you are really a collaboration expert. I mean, our collaboration has been amazing for me professionally and personally. I mean, you sort of redefine collaboration in my experience. Like, do you want to talk a little bit about that, either in how the philosophy of WOPHA and the collaboration in the philosophy of WOPHA sort of you know, fills up how you are an administrator of WOPHA, or also how you are collaborating with other similar organizations around the world. And we have a big event that's coming up that's based on collaboration. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yes. For me, you know, I like to think, or I like to say that I am really inspired by all the collective experience that artists and women photographers have had in terms where when we think in Latino artists, Latino, Latina, Latinx artists, and how they develop these strategies of collectivity in trying to find a space, to find, you know, to claim respect, to claim the power of their voices in their specific context. So I am inspired by that atmosphere, I would say radical atmosphere, but also, as I mentioned at the beginning, with the female division of the Cuban Photography Club. And that was so important because these women in 1937, that was when 1935 was the year that the club was created, and the female division of the Cuban Photography Club was established in 1947. And all these women, you know, they got together not only for, you know, creating a space for knowing or practice photography as a creative form, but also to create a space of feminine or female socialization. And by doing so, they broke the circle of being at home, but also they claim their right to have a presence in the public space. So I am inspired by all of these ideas, and I think that collaboration, sisterhood, the idea of established allies, to have complicity is some of the values that I support as part of the organization. And because of that, I am going to the WOPHA Congress, and I remember, you know, when I came here to Miami, and you have this access to the world, thinking on the access of internet, something that I didn't have in have in Cuba, and I found that this idea of creating a work for recognizing the contributions of women photographers, you know, I wasn't alone in that endeavor. There were only other organizations that were doing similar work in other contexts. So for me, it was crucial to create a space, and I like to say, I want to create a place, a space for photography, a critical space for photography in Miami. And in that sense, for me, was evident the need to have a convening of all these organizations of art historians, prominent women photographers, to discuss and to debate what is happening with the field of women and photography today, and how feminism have impacted what we consider as contemporary art or contemporary photography. So that's the beginning of the idea of the Congress.
Mm-hmm. Tell us more about the Congress.
and then when I include here in the presentation this general introduction about what we are proposing, I think that I mentioned some of things here. We are trying to create this big celebration, and I am very grateful to have the support from PAMM, from Knight Foundation. For me, PAMM was the ideal place to host this event in Miami. And some of we have our advisory board that is composed by Idurri Alonso, Associate Curator of Latin American Collections at the Getty Research Institute, and Mane Adaro, Director and Editor of Atlas, Visual Imaginary, a magazine focused on gender and photography based in Chile. Maurice Berger was working with us until his passing in March because of COVID, and we, to honor him in the context of the Congress, we are dedicating a panel to one of the topics that he was more committed to, that is this relationship, or the relationship between feminism and race, and how all and the power of representation, and how all of that collides in photography, and Mari Bicles. And as part of the speakers that we have in the event, I just make a general selection here. We have confirmed about 15 speakers. There will be in total 25 speakers approximately. And where we have Deborah Willis. I am so honored, so grateful, so excited to have all these persons coming to Miami and reflecting about women and photography today. Deborah Willis, Abigail Solomon, Rosanna Marcosi, Anna Fox, Leslie Deschler and Zoraida Lopez, Laila Matula, Maggie Stever, Claire Raymond. As part of the event, also we are establishing important collaborations with the city, with institutions here in Miami, specifically the Frost Art Museum, University of Miami, El Espacio 23, the Betsy Hotel, and where during the Congress, you know that because you are in charge of that part, we will be also activating the studios of women photographers in the city. So all of these people that are coming, they will have the opportunity to also to know what is happening in our community.
And there are some surprises that we cannot announce yet, but that are very exciting about other participants.
Yes,
but
yes.
Be on the lookout for some upcoming announcements about who's participating.
Yeah, and an important element is that the Congress is being presented as part of the Feminist Art Coalition, a national-wide initiative that consists that through the year, I mean from September of this year through the end of 2021, more than 100 museums in the US will be dedicating its program to women and feminism. So
I just saw in the comments that Maya Ibar, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, says, when is it? And I would just like to say that it was supposed to take place today, which is why we scheduled this talk for today. But when is it actually taking place, Aldeide?
It's taking place in November 18th to November 19th of 2021. That will be that Thursday and Friday, 2 days, the symposium. But of course, we are having an artist residency that will be for that week long. On Saturday, we will have the studio visits of all the people that subscribe to participate in the Congress. We have the possibility to attend. Yeah. But it's in November of next year.
We had to postpone it because of COVID, of course.
Exactly.
So we wanted to give you all a chance to ask any questions or make any comments. And so I think at this point, we're going to turn back the conversation to our wonderful colleague at PAMM, Marie, to lead the Q&A.
Hi, ladies. How are you?
Great.
This was a great talk. It was really, really nice. I was like, you know, I'm waiting behind the scenes, so I was trying not to get too into it, could like stay focused for my moment to come back in with some questions for you all. So, so everyone out there in webinar world, please feel free to start typing in your questions, and I've got a few to get us going right now. So my first question is for Aldeide. I wanted to know how living in Miami has influenced your curatorial and research practice, and which I'm sure translates into the work you're doing with WOPHA.
Yes, as I mentioned, for me, living in the city where I love Miami, I feel like a totally Miamian. And Well, I would start, my first change, I was really focused on the project of Catalog Cuban women photographers. And that's, I think, Women Photographers International Archive is a result of my work in the city and my comprehension of the city and how I needed to expand the scope of the project. In terms of how also when my own embracing of the Latinx identity is part of me living in the city, because it's so important for me, not only, and that's the experience of all the people that is a migrant. In a certain moment, you left to feel totally 100% identified to your place of origin, and you are still in that process of, and you will never become, or you are in the process of adaptation to the new space. So that's for me what Latinx offer me, is that opportunity to have a voice, to have a space. And yeah, I think that's what Miami has offered me.
Awesome. There is another question I want to come back to. When you mentioned, Amy, you were talking about how you came across Aldeide's catalog. How did you come across it? Like, how did you find it?
That was a while back. I mean, I think I'm just always trying to change the canon as much as I can in my own little way. Like whatever, I'm an independent curator right now, so as well as being curator of programming for WOPHA. So I just use my platform to really, there's like infinite amazing artwork made by BIPOC women. I mean, my personal expertise has historically been in Latin America and the Caribbean, because I lived in Miami for 6 years and I really identify with Miami. But I've also been living in Harlem for 20 years now, and that's a long time. And have learned a lot from this context too. In fact, it's really interesting for me to compare the two contexts and the two sort of constellations of ideas that you get from these two different contexts. But because of these two contexts, I just always try to build lists and exhibitions and programming and other projects, just primarily using BIPOC women. Mm-hmm. So I think I just have always been researching. I always research online, and it was great to find that very rich resource. I was really grateful that it existed.
Nice. So you found it online?
Yeah, I found it online.
Awesome. So that brings me into like some digital world, like technology questions for both of you. So now that photography as a medium, it's more accessible in many ways. And with a lot of, like a lot of cameras even, like most cameras, some cameras have amazing, or some phones have amazing cameras, some okay cameras, but like photography as a medium is accessible, right? So how do you think that's going to change like the conversation, the dialogue that's happening within the world of photography as far as like accessibility for women to be within this world in a bigger way? And how do you think WOPHA will evolve because of that? So whoever wants to dive into that one.
I'll let Aldeide speak to it first. We both have a lot to say, but please, yes. Go ahead, Aldeide.
Yeah, thinking on, well, first of all, of course, we have more access to photography through all the images that we constantly upload on internet. But, thinking, but again, If we think, for example, in social media, in how women are censored in platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, that is still evidence how we are not totally free, or, you know, or because there are still some specific topics that are problematic to this kind of institutions, spaces. So at the end, I think that complicate as well the discussion about how we interact and consume photography. And in another hand, I remember now a conversation of Marvin Haferman when he mentioned that where we all access to photography in some ways, in many ways, but do we all know how to interpret photograph? Are we all visually literate? Is something that he asked. And I think that's quoting this expression of him. He mentioned where we need to be aware of all the process of construction of image. And in that sense, where we are aware of that, and as part of WOPHA, I love to see how artists contested through their practice what is photography. And I know Amy has a lot to say about it as well. And I wanted to mention in the case, for example, of an artist such as Maria Martinez Cañas, and how through, you know, all her work, she has been working on this, you know, pushing the limits of what is photography. And by doing so, she also deconstruct the normalization or the naturalization of gender, but also our understanding of what photography can be.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Amy, anything to add to that?
I mean, I could go on and on, but I think it's just, you know, Aldeide and I have been talking a lot about this, and I think it sort of the bottom line is it comes down to context, sort of what kind of photography has power in the art world and what kind of photography lies outside of power. So like, I don't know, if you look at New York City, like, how do you read the fact that the big museums like MoMA and the Met, for example, they have a specialized photography department? Does that read as conservative, or does that read as experimental, right? But then in the context of Cuba, right, Aldeide, you've been pointing out to me that like you didn't get to take a class about photography during your university years, right? As opposed to me, like when I was at Columbia University, I had to take photography classes, like the history of photography. I was studying art history.
But again,
so for you coming up, it sort of was something that you sought out because it wasn't given to you. And for me, it was like isolating photography as a thing was something that I sort of fled away from and just wanted to call it all art. So the context, and then you were talking about other contexts, right? Aldeide, like in Guatemala and in other parts of Central America. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
No, you know, that depends on photography, on photography, that depends on the context. And I do think, or I do believe that we need, you know, historically photography has demonstrated to be a discipline and with their own rules. And in that sense, even how photography is circulated, or how, you know, I think that that's one of the most fascinating things about photography, because you can go to a museum and find an exhibition of photography. But for example, if you know, there are some kind of photograph that specifically don't have an art, you know, well, it's relative to say an art component, but you know, some photograph that has significance because they have documented a specific moment in time. And for that reason, you need a department of photography. You need to study the peculiarities of this specific medium, because the person that was creating the photograph not necessarily is an artist, but is doing a documentation of a specific period in our history. And in that sense, it needs to be collected, it needs to be studied. That's how I justified the need for studies on photography. And at the same time, we think on women. Women have been using photography. Was the medium that they found was useful to them in the 60s and 70s, where all this process of feminism was happening. And they looked to that medium that didn't have the history of other traditional mediums, as painting and sculpture. So photography allows them to do that process of exploration of their own selves, but also of their primary context. So I think that deserves to be studied and recognized, and to have I do believe on that.
I love your perspective, Aldeide. I always learn so much talking to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And this just got me wanting to ask even more questions, but I'm like, that's what the WOPHA Congress is going to be for.
Exactly.
So I look forward to panels that discuss this, like these very things, like the intersection of like documentation, creativity, artists, coming together, all in this space, in this world of photography. So let's see here. It's 8:03. We're like almost at time. We do have one question that I'm just going to put out there, but if it's a big one, we'll maybe answer it on our Facebook or YouTube. It's from Marjorie Gordon, and she asks, have you and your collaborators debated the choices, meanings, and interpretations of the terms photographers versus photo-based artists, or perhaps more inclusive, artists working with photography?
Yes,
that's like a whole panel, right?
Yes, of course. And that's what is, that's what we will be speaking in the Congress. We will be answering questions such as, what does mean to create an organization focused on women when the definition of women is being constantly redefined? What does it mean to speak about photography when photography is being redefined? And of course, what does it mean to be a feminist today? So that's for the Congress.
Awesome. And in the meantime, if people want to follow, support WOPHA, find out more about it, and stay in touch with you all in advance of the Congress in November of 2021, how can they do that? Where should they go?
Well, they can go to our website, wopha.org, and also follow us on Instagram under WOPHA Foundation, where every week we have a new women photographer to sharing her work as part of the WOPHA series. And well, I think I am very reachable. I am on Facebook, I am on Instagram, so they can always write.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. This was a lovely conversation. I learned so much, hearing about your backgrounds, the work that each of you have done. And I'm even more excited, if possible, for the Congress next year at PAMM. And I'm really looking forward to following everything that you develop over this next year towards that Congress happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you out there in the virtual world, for joining us. And we will see you all around.
Such a pleasure to be back at PAMM in this context. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.